Again, thank you so much for joining me.
I am delighted to be with you, Kris. Thanks for having me.
I love the Discerning Parent, an Ignatian Guide to Raising Your Teen. I don't think I've ever seen a book for parents who have those teens in their lives right now that approaches it quite the way you do. There's a wholeness to it that it's not only for the teen but also for that parent.
Yeah, and that's certainly what we were aiming for. And I should even say that it's something that came around in the process of writing. It started actually as a book that we were thinking about really more for young people. And as we went on, we realized, no, this is really more about what it means to be a parent and how to approach parenting a teen with faith, with some careful sense of wanting what's good for your young person. So it really was in the end an attempt to come at this as parents who really just we're trying to make good decisions. So I appreciate your recognizing that.
Well, it's not a how-to book, not really, because there are a lot of those out there. But what you're doing, I think, in a very real way, is forming the parent to be a spiritual companion. Or maybe, as some people may even feel the term, you're being your child's spiritual director, essentially.
Yeah, that's kind of accurate. And in saying that, we should probably be careful about what we actually mean by that term.
Mm-hmm.
So first, I appreciate that observation. And confession, I don't tend to read how-to parenting books, and frankly, I don't think Sue does either. As a genre, the real problem is, well, who are you to tell us how to parent our kid,
Mm-hmm.
And then we really wanted to avoid that because we don't certainly claim that kind of expertise. What we do claim, though, is, some knowledge of particularly the Ignatian tradition, which is something I've taught at Boston College for a number of years. And in my wife's case, coming at it as a therapist, she does, something about developmental theory. She knows something about, patterns of growth in young people. So it struck us that there were things that we could certainly draw from, but at the end of the day, parenting is always unique to every child, and parents of multiple kids know that you
Mm-hmm.
can't parent all of your children the same way. So we really didn't want to write a how-to guide and say, these are the tried and true methods that always work, because frankly, I don't think those exist. And the other point is that we're in the midst of it. We're raising teens now, so ours are 17, 15, and 13, and so we're right in the midst of trying to figure this out as we go. And so the place that we went to in the book then was in thinking about, all right, how can we draw from our understanding and our professional life, but also our experience as parents, and say something about what it means to accompany a young person, and really that's what it means to be a spiritual guide. So even the term spiritual director is one that's gotten a little bit of pushback even among spiritual directors, I think, in recent years, because it's not about saying do this, do that. It's very much about walking with a young person, or even an older person, but in our case, with a young person, to say, how can you live more reflectively? What are the questions that we can ask that encourage our teens to develop patterns of reflection, to develop patterns of prayer, and ultimately to develop patterns that lead to good decision making. So that's, I think, a very apt observation.
I'm so glad that you brought out that distinction about the quote-unquote spiritual director, because I agree with you. I think it's a term that we have to really look at our words. And director does mean you tell them what to do, as opposed to that need to be able to listen deeply and to kind of, what is God doing in there? Now, the Christian parent has brought that child, hopefully, ideally, into the divine life by bringing them into the church to receive baptism. And there the church charges that parent to walk with them and to guide them. And it's more important to listen to what God's doing in that heart instead of telling them what they should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and of course, there's absolutely a developmental side to this too. And again, parents know this, that of course you're telling your children what to do when they're young. You're saying, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that. And that's very appropriate for, children of a certain age. But, as they enter into their teen years, number one, it would be a disservice to them to keep doing that. And number two, and this is really the more important point that you're, I think, underscoring, at the end of the day, they are the ones that will have a relationship with God or not. And so, you can't steer that. You can't oversteer that. It is an act of faith to effectively say to God, this is your child. You created this human being, and, we believe that you want to reach out to this person in love and draw them into friendship. So, at some point we kind of have to get out of the way and allow that to happen. And as I say that, I'm mindful of a text that comes from really the book that very much is behind our book, namely the Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius. That was the real framework that is behind what we were writing about. And in the Spiritual Exercises, Ignatius writes this very interesting annotation right at the beginning. He says effectively, you got to get out of the way. He says to those giving the exercises, you've got to let the Creator deal with the creature directly.
Mm-hmm.
There can't be an intermediary. So we really are, trying to walk that very fine line between, on the one hand, showing them what they need to know and kind of moving them in the directions that are going to lead to good choices, and on the other hand, getting out of the way so that they really can develop in freedom a desire to know and love God more deeply.
Tim, I think one of the great fears for many parents who do feel they have, at the very least, some type of faith life, okay? They're trying to instill that for their kids, is this great fear that somehow they're going to leave the faith or they're going to leave the church. And
yes.
That fear that's inside of the parent is something that has to be dealt with. And I think that's something that you, in such a beautiful way, this is why this book is like no other I've ever seen, is that you help that parent, okay, you got to start with yourself first. So you can listen, because how much of it is a projection of your wants, your desires, your fears, as opposed to what's going on in the heart of that kid?
That's a really, really good observation, Kris. I think you're, very much, kind of tuning into what we were thinking about. Here's the backdrop. One of the first books that I've written, it's called Seeds of Hope, and the subtitle is Young Adults in the Catholic Church in the United States. This book came out in, I believe it was 2008, and this was more of an academic thing. I did this, when I was still teaching theology, and what really struck me then and continues to strike me now, even more recently, I've taught courses on evangelization and emerging adulthood. The statistics are pretty scary, and I've listened to a lot of parents and even grandparents who are just distraught, reflecting, my kid's not going to church, or they're young adults and they're not raising their own kids in the faith, and it's really wrenching for a lot of parents and grandparents. That fear that you're talking about, they're going to leave the church or they're not going to have a relationship with God. That's very real, and the most recent studies that have come out of the Pew Center are not encouraging. There are young people leaving the church behind today. Now, where I come at this, and I'll just return to the fact that the book, the older one I was talking about, was called Seeds of Hope. I don't want it to be a grim, commentary that, that's falling apart, because it's not that simple. Mm-hmm. I see that there are seeds of hope. There are elements in young people's lives which really scream that faith is not dead. It's changing. It's changing in pretty serious ways, and it is leading to real repercussions in parishes and on college campuses and in dioceses. And I don't want to ignore those facts, but the faith is alive and it's changing, and the church is going to have to change as a consequence, and that's another conversation. But the point that you mentioned just a moment ago is certainly true. We can't make our children into great Catholics. We can't just make them go to church. Again, at the end of the day, that's going to be a disservice to them and their emerging adulthood. What we can do, though, is always love them the way that God loves us. And here we even call to mind the example of St. Monica, who was the mother of St. Augustine. And, she prayed for years and years and years for this wayward son of hers that just was going all over the place and trying all kinds of almost like cult-like activities and getting himself in trouble. And she just was praying and praying and praying. And, for us, that image of St. Monica, just praying for her son is really, I think, a helpful reminder that, there's a long story that God is writing with our kids. And so we don't have to know right now what that story is going to look like or that they're going to love going to church every week. And if they do, that's great. I mean, some do, and, that's obviously a good thing. But if they don't, it's not the end of the story, and to allow God some space to be working on that child's heart, even through us as we are praying for our children.
It goes back to a lot of what's going on in the heart of that parent. At some point, God is also asking you, do you trust me? And sometimes I think if we're honest with ourselves as parents, having raised 3 myself, that you are listening to the world, you listen to your own, what's going on inside of you, and then you look at your kids and well, I know best, and you need to be doing this, 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 this. Instead of guiding them, what is God doing here? And it may cause us to struggle, too.
Yeah, and I think we would be fooling ourselves as parents if we think that our children's experience of faith or of the church isn't going to change our faith. It needs to. It really needs to. And we have to allow that God is going to surprise us, maybe even through our children, in the way that they challenge us. I'll just give you an example. This was just coming up over the past week. My one of my kids was coming home and talking about a film that they had watched in school. And of course, a lot of times this comes through school. It just, things surprise us. Mm-hmm. It was about the food industry. All right, so just writ large, the food industry. Anyway, and her immediate takeaways was, I'm going to change all of these things. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to eat that. Or we shouldn't be buying this, or we shouldn't be buying that. And here's the way I thought about it. First of all, there was part of me that responded the way, in fact, my mother-in-law did, who lives with us. And it was kind of like, oh, give me a break. She wanted to push back and say, that's going over the top, and you can't believe everything you see, and this kind of thing. And there was a part of me that responded that way. But the other part of me, which very much came out as a consequence of writing this book, said to myself, you know what? There's something very good about an awakening of moral conscience. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be well-directed. And so we're going to have more conversations in the coming weeks about food and food industry and all this sort of thing. But I was really happy that this young person was expressing a kind of moral sense. Wait a minute, we're behaving badly as a society in regard to this particular issue, and I want to really harness that. I really want to give some space for that to grow, because you know what? If there's a moral challenge, then that needs to challenge me too. That needs to be a source for me to ask. Okay, well, what does this mean for the way that we go grocery shopping and make food as a family? Those are healthy questions to ask, and those kinds of challenges are ones that we can welcome. Sometimes God does sort of prod us by raising these questions in our kids.
And just so that anyone out there thinks we're advocating in any way, this a laissez-faire type of commune-esque type of atmosphere in your home, what you are bringing forward and helping the parent, and then in turn modeling for the kids, is this engagement with one of the soundest teachings in the church today, and that's the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Right.
It's hard to go wrong with that tried and true encounter that he guides us in.
Yeah, and the backdrop here is that I've, as I mentioned, taught Ignatian spirituality for many, many years, primarily at Boston College, and I still, in fact, have a class that I teach on that subject. So, in fact, this is, if I count up, the other ways I've gotten at it, this is really my fourth book on the topic of Ignatian spirituality, and so it's something that I've kind of lived and breathed for a long time. And this is the first one that I know of, anyway, that has really tried to apply it so directly to raising teens. I should add, by the way, that our previous book with Ave Maria Press is called 6 Sacred Rules for Families, and that's just a general application of Ignatian spirituality to family life. This one is a little bit more specific in that it's particularly about the question of discernment in a period of our children's lives that is so critical. But you're absolutely right that Ignatius himself was very interested in the ways that God moves us and moves our hearts and moves our desires to embrace great challenges for the kingdom. I mean, that's how I would describe the spiritual exercises. It's a program for kind of honing our ability to listen to God and to respond to the challenges that God places before us in building the kingdom. So, it just struck us both, Sue and me, at one point, that as we're raising our kids, this is what we want to help them to become attuned to, was listening to God and orienting their lives around how to do what God asks them to do, deep in their hearts, listening to their desires, and of course bringing them into conversation with God in prayer. So you're right. I mean, this is not us going out on a limb and coming up with some crazy new ideas. And again, parenting guides can sometimes come across that way. I mean, this is really falling back on one of the great spiritual traditions of the Church.
We'll return to Inside the Pages in just a moment. Did you know that you can obtain a free app which contains all your favorite Discerning Hearts programs? Father Timothy Gallagher, Dr. Anthony Lillis, Archbishop George Lucas, Father Mauritius Fildi, and so many more, including episodes from Inside the Pages, can be obtained on the Discerning Hearts free app. This also includes all the novenas and devotionals and prayers, including the Holy Rosary and Stations of the Cross, the Chaplet of St. Michael, and the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady, all available on the Discerning Hearts free app. Visit the iTunes and Google Play app stores to obtain your free Discerning Hearts app today. A prayer of St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all that I have and call my own. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen.
Hello, my name is Deacon Omar Gutierrez, and I want to ask you to support Discerning Hearts in a special way. We, Kris McGregor, the board, and I all know that not everyone listening can help financially. We know we have listeners from all parts of the world, and we have made a commitment since the beginning to make the truths shared through Discerning Hearts totally free. So while you may not be able to contribute financially, what you can do is certainly pray, but also give us positive reviews on whatever platform you use to listen to us. If it's iTunes, Android, Stitcher, Spotify, however it is that you get these podcasts, or if you're on YouTube and you like our videos, please give us a good rating and write a review. The more good ratings and reviews we get, the higher our profile, and the more listeners will discover us, listeners who may have the means to contribute in the future. Please consider rating us and writing a positive review today.
We now return to Inside the Pages. In that spiritual journey, ideally, Christ draws us all towards Him. And that's precisely what you're advocating. It's not just for the teen. I'm going to say it again. It's not just for the teen, but it's also for the parent, the spiritual growth, because you will learn something. If you're listening to Christ in your child and what's happening, that's Christ speaking to you.
Yes.
So what is He saying to you?
Yeah, that's right.
What you and your wife, Sue, Tim, have done in The Discerning Parent, an Ignatian Guide to Raising Your Teen, is you're shifting the paradigm from making decisions to discerning. Sometimes we think of discerning as, well, I have to discern a vocation. And yes, you do. Those are big things.
Mm-hmm.
But you want your teens to listen, to discern, should I go to that movie theater with the friends? Why don't I feel like I should be doing it? What are the forces that are compelling me to go on this, jump in that car that evening? Or should I listen to something that's disquieting and maybe say no?
Yeah, the image that I tend to return to, it's one that we make reference to in the book, and it's written by, in fact, another couple. Wilkie Au and Noreen Cannon Au wrote this very interesting book, and they talk about the acoustics of the heart, and I just love that phrase. They talk about refining the acoustics of the heart. So the image is it's obviously it's a metaphor. It's a musical metaphor that it's kind of like teaching your kid music. That if they develop a musical sense, they are able to pretty quickly then figure out when the chord sounds wrong or when there's a note that's kind of out of place. It's just there's discord there. It's out of tune, and that's what discernment is like. Is that if you're teaching the habits of decision making and the habits of just even things like going to mass, at some point down the road there's going to be the point where they'll just say that just doesn't feel right, and that could be anything. It could be a relationship, it could be a do I do this thing that my friends are doing, even up to the point of, as you point out, vocational discernment in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
Does God want me to become a priest? Does God want me to enter a religious order? Those kinds of questions. If I have a heart that is attuned to God, then I'm going to know what harmony sounds like. I'm going to know what a discordant note sounds like in my life. And that's really the fruit that we're hoping, unfolds, over time, even if right now they don't know exactly what that might look like.
See, I think that's so key, because what you and your wife have done in this book is that I go back to baptism. The thing is, the parents, first, your child is God's child. He belongs to God and he doesn't belong to us. We're given charge of them. Right. They come into this world, and then at baptism, we're supposed to, very specifically in the liturgy, says you're supposed to raise them in the faith. Well, what is faith? Faith is relationship. And so you're modeling in that spiritual companionship. You're helping them to do that listening, to foster that. And so a very example, if you don't mind me bringing this up, Tim, my husband was the program director at a rock radio station for many, many, many years, decades. And we would go to parishes, and parents inevitably wanted a list of all the songs their kids should stay away from. What are the songs? What are the groups? That's what they came for, because they wanted a list to say, you can't bring that into the house. But instead, my husband, in his wisdom, in a really wonderful way, would say to them, I'm not going to give you a list. What you have to do is listen to the music that your kids are playing, and then ask them why they're listening to it. Yeah. And maybe they just like the beat. Maybe there's a way of challenging them, but you yourself have to model that engagement, that relationship, don't you?
That's exactly it. I mean, this is, to your question earlier about, is it a laissez-faire approach to parenting? I mean, quite the opposite. It's deeply engaged. You're walking with your children at every step. And not, by the way, the other extreme being, helicopter parenting, where you're always hovering above everything they're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is one of the great challenges of parenting in general, right even before we get to questions about spirituality. One of the great challenges is always going to be, how much is too much and how much is too little, so you're trying to find that balance. But in this case, you're really just trying to walk with them, and this is why the model of spiritual direction is, I think, a helpful one. The spiritual director is somebody that is going through a spiritual journey with another person. So the better term might even be spiritual companion. At no point is the person doing it on his or her own. So, our kids, it's not at any point that we're just like, see ya, you're on your own here. Now, obviously, we want to suggest appropriate challenges and, basic things. I mean, just yesterday I was telling my son, for example, hey, go down and you be the one to pick up the pizza. You go to the store. I'll give you money. You go. You're old enough. You can do this. So, we're not trying to hover. We're trying to give them freedom, but we're also saying, I am with you always. I am, with you on this journey of your young adulthood. I'm going to share with you things that I have learned along my own pilgrimage toward God, and that's the great image that we use in our earlier book. But at the end of the day, it is you who must find where it is that God is leading you. And at some point, you will be moving on your own in that direction. I'm never going to leave you. I'm your parent, so I'm not going to leave you. I mean, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be with you on this. But also recognizing again that God is dealing with them in freedom, and giving them the space to discern that.
Just to be able to say, how in the heck do I talk to my kids at this age about their body, and quite frankly, sex, alcohol, drugs, social media? How do I see? That's where they want the how-to.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we really resisted from the get-go. We resisted, that there would be these short, easy answers because, my goodness, I mean, again, children are different. You just can't assume that one size fits all. I mean, that's why I was very struck by this. Don't let them listen to this song or that song.
Right.
I mean, same kind of idea here. It's just, I just don't think that works. I mean, or best case scenario, maybe it works for some, but it's just not going to work for everybody. So in this chapter that we title "The Gift of the Body," we are certainly trying to just underscore this is a big deal. When you're dealing with teens, and of course every parent gets this. That body's changing. That means that the way that they understand themselves changes, the way they relate to other people changes. Obviously, the way they relate to boys or girls, depending on their sex, that changes. So we're pointing to some research just in our own Catholic tradition that help us to underscore the importance of this question. But the other thing that we're trying to do though is just raise the questions for parents, to really come to a more discerning place themselves. What are the specific and unique challenges to my kid, So, I mean, just one example, we ask them in the chapter to reflect on just what did the teen, your kid, look like a year ago and what's changed, what's different today compared to a year ago, just to stop and take a little bit of a long look and to consider what are the particular challenges that my young person is facing. So things like that, we're really trying to give people an entree to be discerning in the concrete circumstances of their own lives.
And I do love the fact that in the book, The Discerning Parent, an Ignatian Guide to Raising Your Teen, that if you're going to base anything on St. Ignatius or the exercises or his teachings, you got to have exercises. You got to have those pauses where, you ask yourself several questions and then sit back and receive. And you place those in every single chapter at just the perfect spot, Tim.
Thank you. And I should say, by the way, that I give a lot of credit to Ave Maria Press. They really urged us to do that, to make it, very hands-on and something that can be a source of conversation between moms and dads. You can't. I say this to my students every year. You can't do Ignatian spirituality by just talking about it. At the end of the day, it's work. I mean, it's not work. That's the wrong term. But it's effort. That's the better term. It's effort. It's coming to meaningful practices of conversation with God, reflection, and again in the concrete circumstances. So one of the other suggestions that we make, for example, is to watch a show or something that your teen enjoys watching, to watch it together. Because immediately their perspective on it changes because they start to see it through your eyes, So things like that, and it opens, of course, conversation then that, hopefully can be enlightening to, both you and your teen. That's certainly, that was one of our aims, is to create those moments of, kind of takeaway or aha things that would, lead to the right kinds of conversations.
We went through that with one of our daughters who was very much in her teen years into anime, and I just didn't understand anime at all.
Right.
So I sat down and watched it with her, and a couple of the programs, and though she felt was a little awkward at times, I began to understand where she was coming from with this. And then we started, I introduced her to some movies like The Seven Samurai and some different things culturally, and it opened up a whole new dialogue for us.
I bet that was great.
Yeah, and it's kind of surprised me. Now, is it all great? No, but then she sees that too.
And I'm sure that for you, there was a little bit of an overcoming, the aesthetic. I don't particularly like the way this looks or something like that.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
But it opened up that understanding of, why is this? What is it that's so attractive about it? But anyway, Tim, the book, The Discerning Parent, I hope people have understood that I couldn't endorse this more highly. And also someone who our audience is very familiar with, Father Timothy Gallagher, can we say gave it at least 2 thumbs up. That's all he's got, but he gave it his all.
He's a friend, yeah. We've both written together, and in fact, he blurbed this book, and I blurbed his latest book, so we're on the same page.
Yeah, it's just absolutely outstanding. I wish we had more time, but any final thoughts?
Well, I guess I would just express it as a hope that this is in some sense a great moment to be a parent, because we've in just even our own history of our church, this is a moment when we have greater understanding of these great spiritual traditions. These are not just for people in seminary anymore. I mean, this is an opportunity to really deepen our own faith and parenthood. My God, what a wonderful opportunity to just be in the field where the Lord calls us to gather harvest. It's a wonderful opportunity for our own spiritual growth, let alone seeing the growth of our teens. So I just certainly hope that if our book is able to help people to do that reflectively, then we will have accomplished our task.
Hats off to you and your wife, Sue, and your kids are very blessed to have parents that listen so deeply to their hearts.
I'll write that down and tell them to give a call.
Do that, will ya? Okay. Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kris.
With Tim Muldoon, we've gone inside the pages of The Discerning Parent, an Ignatian guide to raising your teen. To learn more about this book or to obtain a copy, go to AveMariaPress.com. The website for its publisher, Ave Maria Press, or you can find it at any fine Catholic bookstore. To hear and or to download this conversation, along with hundreds of other spiritual programs, visit DiscerningHearts.com. This has been a production of DiscerningHearts.com. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you will first pray for our mission, and if you feel us worthy, consider a charitable donation, which is fully tax-deductible, to support our efforts. But most of all, we ask that you tell a friend about DiscerningHearts.com and join us next time for Inside the Pages, insights from today's most compelling authors.